Chapter 9 of My Life, The Story of a Provincial, by Anton Chekhov. Translated by Constance Garnett, 1861 to 1946. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 9. Now we used to see each other often, sometimes twice a day. She used to come to the cemetery almost every day after dinner and read the epitaphs on the crosses and tombstones while she waited for me. Sometimes she would come into the church, and standing by me would look on while I worked. The stillness, the naive work of the painters and gilders, Radish's sage reflections, and the fact that I did not differ externally from the other workmen, and worked just as they did in my waistcoat with no socks on, and that I was addressed familiarly by them, all this was new to her and touched her. One day a workman, who was painting a dove on the ceiling, called out to me in her presence, "Misail, hand me up the white paint." I took him the white paint, and afterwards, when I let myself down by the frail scaffolding, she looked at me, touched to tears and smiling. "What a dear you are!" she said. I remembered from my childhood how a green parrot belonging to one of the rich men of the town had escaped from its cage, and how for quite a month afterwards the beautiful bird had haunted the town, flying from garden to garden, homeless and solitary. Maria Viktorovna reminded me of that bird. "There is positively nowhere for me to go now but the cemetery," she said to me with a laugh. "The town has become disgustingly dull. At the Azhogins' they are still reciting, singing, lisping. I have grown to detest them of late. Your sister is an unsociable creature. Mademoiselle Blagovo hates me for some reason. I don't care for the theatre. Tell me, where am I to go?" When I went to see her, I smelt of paint and turpentine, and my hands were stained. And she liked that. She wanted me to come to her in my ordinary working clothes, but in her drawing room those clothes made me feel awkward. I felt embarrassed, as though I were in uniform, so I always put on my new serge trousers when I went to her, and she did not like that. "You must own you are not quite at home in your new character," she said to me one day. "Your workman's dress does not feel natural to you; you are awkward in it. Tell me, isn't that because you haven't a firm conviction, and are not satisfied? The very kind of work you have chosen, your painting, surely it does not satisfy you, does it?" she asked, laughing. "I know paint makes things look nicer and last longer, but those things belong to rich people who live in towns, and after all they are luxuries. Besides, you have often said yourself that everybody ought to get his bread by the work of his own hands, yet you get money and not bread. Why shouldn't you keep to the literal sense of your words? You ought to be getting bread, that is, you ought to be ploughing, sowing, reaping, threshing, or doing something which has a direct connection with agriculture, for instance, looking after cows, digging, building huts of logs." She opened a pretty cupboard that stood near her writing table, and said, "I am saying all this to you because I want to let you into my secret. Voilà! This is my agricultural library. Here I have fields, kitchen garden and orchard, and cattle yard and beehives. I read them greedily, and have already learnt all the theory to the tiniest detail. My dream, my darling wish, is to go to our Dubetchnya as soon as March is here. It's marvellous there, exquisite, isn't it? The first year I shall have a look round and get into things, and the year after I shall begin to work properly myself, putting my back into it, as they say. My father has promised to give me Dubetchnya, and I shall do exactly what I like with it." Flushed, excited to tears, and laughing, she dreamed aloud how she would live at Dubetchnya, and what an interesting life it would be. I envied her. March was near, the days were growing longer and longer, and on bright sunny days water dripped from the roofs at midday, and there was a fragrance of spring. I, too, longed for the country. And when she said that she should move to Dubetchnya, I realized vividly that I should remain in the town alone, and I felt that I envied her with her cupboard of books and her agriculture. I knew nothing of work on the land and did not like it, and I should have liked to have told her that work on the land was slavish toil, but I remembered that something similar had been said more than once by my father, and I held my tongue. Lent began. Victor Ivanitch, whose existence I had begun to forget, arrived from Petersburg. He arrived unexpectedly, without even a telegram to say he was coming. When I went in, as usual in the evening, he was walking about the drawing room, telling some story with his face freshly washed and shaven, looking 10 years younger. His daughter was kneeling on the floor, taking out of his trunks boxes, bottles, and books, and handing them to Pavel the footman. I involuntarily drew back a step when I saw the engineer, but he held out both hands to me and said, smiling, showing his strong white teeth that looked like a sledge driver's, "Here he is, here he is! Very glad to see you, Mr. House Painter. Masha has told me all about it. She has been singing your praises. I quite understand and approve," he went on, taking my arm. "To be a good workman is ever so much more honest and more sensible than wasting government paper and wearing a cockade on your head. I myself worked in Belgium with these very hands, and then spent 2 years as a mechanic." He was wearing a short reefer jacket and indoor slippers. He walked like a man with the gout, rolling slightly from side to side and rubbing his hands. Humming something, he softly purred and hugged himself with satisfaction at being at home again at last, and able to have his beloved shower bath. "There is no disputing," he said to me at supper. "There is no disputing. You are all nice and charming people, but for some reason, as soon as you take to manual labour, or go in for saving the peasants, in the long run it all comes to no more than being a dissenter. Aren't you a dissenter? Here you don't take vodka. What's the meaning of that if it is not being a dissenter?" To satisfy him I drank some vodka, and I drank some wine too. We tasted the cheese, the sausage, the pâtés, the pickles, and the savouries of all sorts that the engineer had brought with him, and the wine that had come in his absence from abroad. The wine was first rate. For some reason the engineer got wine and cigars from abroad without paying duty. The caviare and the dried sturgeon some one sent him for nothing. He did not pay rent for his flat, as the owner of the house provided the kerosene for the line, and altogether he and his daughter produced on me the impression that all the best in the world was at their service, and provided for them for nothing. I went on going to see them, but not with the same eagerness. The engineer made me feel constrained, and in his presence I did not feel free. I could not face his clear, guileless eyes; his reflections wearied and sickened me. I was sickened, too, by the memory that so lately I had been in the employment of this red-faced, well-fed man, and that he had been brutally rude to me. It is true that he put his arm round my waist, slapped me on the shoulder in a friendly way, approved my manner of life; but I felt that, as before, he despised my insignificance, and only put up with me to please his daughter, and I couldn't now laugh and talk as I liked, and I behaved unsociably and kept expecting that in another minute he would address me as Panteley as he did his footman Pavel. How my pride as a provincial and a working man was revolted! I, a proletarian, a house painter, went every day to rich people who were alien to me, and whom the whole town regarded as though they were foreigners, and every day I drank costly wines with them and ate unusual dainties. My conscience refused to be reconciled to it. On my way to the house I sullenly avoided meeting people, and looked at them from under my brows as though I really were a dissenter, and when I was going home from the engineer's I was ashamed of my well-fed condition. Above all, I was afraid of being carried away. Whether I was walking along the street, or working, or talking to the other fellows, I was all the time thinking of one thing only of going in the evening to see Marya Viktorovna, and was picturing her voice, her laugh, her movements. When I was getting ready to go to her, I always spent a long time before my nurse's warped looking-glass as I fastened my tie. My serge trousers were detestable in my eyes, and I suffered torments, and at the same time despised myself for being so trivial. When she called to me out of the other room that she was not dressed and asked me to wait, I listened to her dressing. It agitated me. I felt as though the ground were giving way under my feet. And when I saw a woman's figure in the street, even at a distance, I invariably compared it. It seemed to me that all our girls and women were vulgar, that they were absurdly dressed, and did not know how to hold themselves. And these comparisons aroused a feeling of pride in me. Marya Viktorovna was the best of them all, and I dreamed of her and myself at night. One evening at supper with the engineer we ate a whole lobster. As I was going home afterwards I remembered that the engineer twice called me "my dear fellow" at supper, and I reflected that they treated me very kindly in that house, as they might an unfortunate big dog who had been kicked out by its owners. that they were amusing themselves with me, and that when they were tired of me they would turn me out like a dog. I felt ashamed and wounded to the point of tears as though I had been insulted, and looking up at the sky I took a vow to put an end to all this. The next day I did not go to the Dolzhikovs'. Late in the evening, when it was quite dark and raining, I walked along Great Dvoryansky Street, looking up at the windows. Every one was asleep at the Azhogins', and the only light was in one of the furthest windows. It was Madame Azhogin in her own room, sewing by the light of 3 candles, imagining that she was combating superstition. Our house was in darkness, but at the Dolzhikovs', on the contrary, the windows were lighted up, but one could distinguish nothing through the flowers and the curtains. I kept walking up and down the street. The cold March rain drenched me through. I heard my father come home from the club. He stood knocking at the gate. A minute later a light appeared at the window, and I saw my sister, who was hastening down with a lamp, while with the other hand she was twisting her thick hair together as she went. Then my father walked about the drawing room, talking and rubbing his hands, while my sister sat in a low chair, thinking and not listening to what he said. But then they went away. The light went out. I glanced round at the engineers, and there, too, all was darkness now. In the dark and the rain I felt hopelessly alone, abandoned to the whims of destiny. I felt that all my doings, my desires, and everything I had thought and said till then were trivial in comparison with my loneliness, in comparison with my present suffering, and the suffering that lay before me in the future. Alas, the thoughts and doings of living creatures are not nearly so significant as their sufferings. And without clearly realizing what I was doing, I pulled at the bell of the Dolzhikovs' gate, broke it, and ran along the street like some naughty boy, with a feeling of terror in my heart, expecting every moment that they would come out and recognize me. When I stopped at the end of the street to take breath, I could hear nothing but the sound of the rain, and somewhere in the distance a watchman striking on a sheet of iron. For a whole week I did not go to the Dolzhikovs'. My serge trousers were sold. There was nothing doing in the painting trade. I knew the pangs of hunger again, and earned from 2d. to 4d. a day, where I could, by heavy and unpleasant work. Struggling up to my knees in the cold mud, straining my chest, I tried to stifle my memories, and, as it were, to punish myself for the cheeses and preserves with which I had been regaled at the engineers. But all the same, as soon as I lay in bed, wet and hungry, my sinful imagination immediately began to paint exquisite, seductive pictures, and with amazement I acknowledged to myself that I was in love, passionately in love, and I fell into a sound, heavy sleep, feeling that hard labour only made my body stronger and younger. One evening snow began falling most inappropriately, and the wind blew from the north as though winter had come back again. When I returned from work that evening I found Maria Viktorovna in my room. She was sitting in her fur coat and had both hands in her muff. "Why don't you come to see me?" she asked, raising her clear, clever eyes, and I was utterly confused with delight and stood stiffly upright before her, as I used to stand facing my father when he was going to beat me. She looked into my face, and I could see from her eyes that she understood why I was confused. "Why don't you come to see me?" she repeated. "If you don't want to come, you see, I have come to you." She got up and came close to me. "Don't desert me," she said, and her eyes filled with tears. "I am alone, utterly alone." She began crying, and hiding her face in her muff, articulated: "Alone. My life is hard, very hard, and in all the world I have no one but you. Don't desert me." Looking for a handkerchief to wipe her tears, she smiled. We were silent for some time, then I put my arms round her and kissed her, scratching my cheek till it bled with her hatpin as I did it. And we began talking to each other as though we had been on the closest terms for ages and ages. End of Chapter 9. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.